working to connect a region of over 600 mill bridges between our lands.
Good evening, I'm Alma Angeles, and you're watching ASEAN in Focus. On tonight's headlines. Survivors of an Indonesian earthquake that killed at least 268 people appeal for food and water as rescuers pick through devastated villages with hopes of finding anyone alive fading. China responds to a visit by U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris to a Philippine island in Palawan near waters claimed by China, saying that the country is not opposed to normal exchanges between the U.S. and the Philippines, but such exchanges should not harm the interests of other countries. One person died and more than 24 were injured in Thailand after a car bomb exploded outside the police station, a police accommodation on Tuesday. And later, a French-Cambodian director's film about a Korean-French adoptee's quest to find her birth parents heralds the arrival of a significant joint productions in cinema that feature fluid identities both on and off the screen. First in our news, survivors of an Indonesian earthquake that killed at least 268 people now appealed for food and water as rescuers pick through devastated villages with hopes of finding anyone alive already fading. President Joko Widodo already visited the area, offering compensation for victims and ordering disaster and rescue agencies to mobilize their personnel. Take a look.
Korban-korban yang masih takut, ya, diperintahkan agar itu didahulukan. Evakuasinya, penyelamatan didahulukan.
Pas kejadian saya langsung lihat ke sini dan mendengar suara pada menjerit di sana, tapi ya saya juga nggak bisa menolong gitu. Sangat disayangi. Malah saya merasa sangat bersalah karena saya tidak bisa melindungi santri saya yang dititipkan sama orang. Pada saat seperti ini, ya seharusnya saya lebih melindungi gitu ya. Jadi masih sangat terasa. Tapi saya juga ya bagaimana waktu itu sedang.
The calls for help came as authorities warned that debris from landslides caused by the strong quake near the town of Cianjur in West Java needed to be cleared ahead of heavy rains forecast in the coming weeks, threatening a second disaster. The epicenter of the shallow 5.6 magnitude quake on Monday was near the town of Cianjur, where most of the victims were killed, and many of those killed were children, according to the head of Indonesia's National Rescue Agency, Basarnas. Some of those dead were students at an Islamic boarding school, while others were killed in their homes when roofs and walls caved in on them. The search operation on Tuesday was made more challenging because of severed road links and temporary power outages in parts of the largely rural mountainous region. The devastation caused by the quake was made worse by a wave of 62 smaller aftershocks that relentlessly shook Cianjur, a town of about 175,000 people. The Geological Agency of the Indonesian Ministry of Energy and Mineral Resources said in an analysis posted online Monday that the soil makeup of the area could have exacerbated the impact of the quake. It said the areas undulating to steep hills were made up of weathered and young volcanic debris. Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese and Russian President Vladimir Putin on Tuesday joined Canadian and French leaders in offering their condolences. Indonesia experiences frequent seismic and volcanic activity due to its position on the Pacific Ring of Fire, where tectonic plates collide.
Mudah-mudahan ya saya bantu dengan pemberitaannya Kang ya.
U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris condemned China's intimidation and coercion in the South China Sea during her trip to the Philippine island of Palawan. aiming to counter Beijing's growing influence in the region. First, let's listen in.
The United States stands with the Philippines in the face of intimidation and coercion in the South China Sea. As the United States has long made clear, we support the 2016 ruling of the UN Arbitral Tribunal, which delivered a unanimous and final decision firmly rejecting China. In May in Tokyo, alongside the leaders of Australia, Japan, and India, President Joe Biden launched the Indo-Pacific Partnership for Maritime Domain Awareness. This initiative uses space-based platforms to deliver a common operating picture of Indo-Pacific waterways and to promote transparency so that our allies and partners can better protect vulnerable fisheries, respond to humanitarian disasters, and detect and counter illicit activities. I am pleased to report that the Philippines is already receiving this stream of data alongside other partners here in Southeast Asia. And we plan to increase this work in the coming months to include launching new satellites into orbit in December to expand this program. Through USAID, we are also launching a new partnership with local communities here in Palawan to promote sustainable fishing, strengthen food security, and conserve marine ecosystems. So this is how I see it. To protect the economic vitality of these communities, to protect the ecosystems they rely on, and to protect lives and livelihoods, we must uphold international rules and norms. As an ally, the United States stands with the Philippines in the face of intimidation and coercion in the South China Sea.
Vice President Harris met with fisherfolk in this coastal village and members of the Philippine Coast Guard. Harris's trip to Palawan comes a day after she held talks with President Ferdinand Marcos in Manila. She reaffirmed the United States' unwavering commitment to defending the Philippines if its vessels or aircraft were attacked in the South China Sea. Washington has a decades-old security alliance with the Philippines, and that includes a mutual defense treaty and a 2014 pact known by the acronym EDCA, which allows for the U.S. military to store defense equipment and supplies on 5 Philippine bases. It also allows U.S. troops to rotate through those military bases. Meanwhile, China responded to the visit by U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris to Palawan near the waters claimed by China, and said that the country is not opposed to normal exchanges between the U.S. and the Philippines. But such exchanges, it said, should not harm the interests of other countries. Again, let's listen in.
It is China's consistent view that exchange and cooperation between countries should be conducive to enhancing mutual understanding and trust between regional countries and to regional peace and stability, rather than targeting or harming any third party's interests. We are not against normal exchange and cooperation between the U.S. and the Philippines, but it shouldn't harm any other country's interests.
Meanwhile, U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin met his Chinese counterpart, Wei Fenghe, in Cambodia, with both sides describing the talks as productive without backing away from their core positions. A senior U.S. defense official said the talks between Austin and Wei on the sidelines of a conference of defense ministers in Siem Reap were productive and professional, and both sides agreed that it's important that countries work together to ensure that competition does not veer into conflict. But competition remains the defining feature of the relationship, according to the official telling journalists. Austin sought the reopening of a number of military military-to-military dialogues and mechanisms to help manage that competition responsibly, according to the official. The rival powers have clashed over a host of issues, including Taiwan, security, and human rights, but there have been attempts to lower the temperature since a rare summit between the leaders of both countries last week. U.S. President Joe Biden and Chinese leader Xi Jinping tried to cool the rhetoric, but the differences were clear, and the exchange between their defense chiefs was similar. Digital currencies need more regulation to stamp out funding for terror operations. That is according to India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi at a major international forum to combat financing of extremist groups. Prime Minister Modi last year said that Bitcoin presented a risk to younger generations and could spoil youth if it ended up in the wrong hands. On Friday, he went further and told delegates at the conference on countering financing of terrorism that private currencies pose a grave security risk. Take a look.
New kinds of technology are being used for terror financing and recruitment. Challenges from the darknet, private currencies, and more are emerging. There is a need for a uniform understanding for new finance technologies. From a uniform understanding, a unified system of checks and balances and regulations can emerge. But we must be careful about one thing. The answer is not demonize technology. Instead, it is to use technology to track, trace, and tackle terrorism.
Globally, the crypto market has been thrown into upheaval by this month's collapse of FTX, a major exchange used for digital transactions. Once valued at $32 billion, FTX filed for bankruptcy last week. Its downfall sent major cryptocurrencies plunging and further undermined investor confidence in the young and turbulent sector. Delegates from dozens of countries are in the capital, New Delhi, for the two-day conference, which follows a special session of the UN's Counterterrorism Committee held in India last month. Cryptocurrencies have been under the scrutiny of Indian regulators since first entering the local market nearly a decade ago, with a surge in fraudulent transactions leading to a central bank ban in 2018. India's Supreme Court lifted the restrictions 2 years later, and the market surged, growing by nearly 650% in the year to June 2021, second only to Vietnam, according to research by Chain Analysis. A magnitude 6.1 earthquake struck northwest Turkey during today's early hours, injuring at least 35 people. The shallow tremor struck about 170 kilometers or 105 miles east of Istanbul, according to the country's largest city, where it was strongly felt. National authorities said the quake was at a magnitude of 5.9, lower than the 6.1 given by the U.S. Geological Survey. And its epicenter was in Duce province's Golyaka district, though it also shook other nearby cities. Interior Minister Suleyman Soylu, who visited Golyaka, said one person was seriously hurt after jumping from a balcony out of panic. He said 70 aftershocks had been recorded. Authorities said schools would be closed on Wednesday in Duce and Sakarya provinces, and we'll give you more updates as we follow this developing story. One person died and more than 2 dozen were injured in Thailand after a car bomb exploded outside police accommodation, according to a provincial governor. The attack took place around noon in Narathiwat, one of the country's southernmost provinces. A low-level conflict has simmered in Thailand's south since 2004, killing more than 7,000 people as rebels in the Muslim-majority region battle for greater autonomy from the state. Naratiwat Governor Sananpong Cansorn told AFP a suspect had driven a car into police accommodation before abandoning the vehicle. The bomb exploded shortly after the car was parked, adding that the police were checking security camera footage to identify the suspect and investigate possible motives. He said one person was killed, 28 others injured, including 2 in critical condition, and we will be following up with this developing story. A key scientific mission is underway led by the UN Health Agency to track and update what we know about global health threats, including Disease X. The UN Health World Organization, or WHO, said that the task will involve updating its list of priority pathogens, ones that cause outbreaks or pandemics, so that investment and research into vaccines, tests, and treatments can be agreed among nations. Now, what is Disease X? First, let's listen in.
The list is a way to prioritize our efforts. I mean, WHO and all the partners working with WHO on certain diseases that have the potential to give rise to a severe epidemic and for which we don't have enough or no medical countermeasure, meaning no drugs, no vaccine. So it's really to focus this effort on this specific group of disease. Just mention that is not an exhaustive list of disease. There are other diseases that can give rise to huge epidemics, but this one is only focusing on disease for which we have not enough drug and vaccine. So Disease X is a concept. Let's say it's a placeholder to be sure that if we have a new disease, completely new disease, or a disease we know but not enough and suddenly emerge and is more severe or spreading everywhere, we will have a space to put the disease and to know that we need to put efforts on, in terms of research to get drugs and vaccine, let's say.
More than 300 scientists worldwide will look into data on 25 virus families and bacteria, as well as Disease X, which, according to the WHO, is an unknown pathogen that could cause a serious international epidemic. The UN Health Agency published its first list of priority pathogens in 2017, and it includes diseases like COVID-19, Ebola, and Marburg virus, Lassa fever, Middle East respiratory syndrome, or MERS, severe acute respiratory syndrome, or SARS, Nipah, and Zika. Meanwhile, Singapore warned today that economic growth could slow to a trickle next year, owing to weakness in key export markets, including the U.S., Europe, and China, as rising interest rates and the Ukraine war cause headwinds. Take a look. The Trade Ministry said it expected growth to come in at 3.5% this year, inside its forecast for 3 to 4%, but then drop sharply in 2023 to just 0.5 to 2.5% as weaker global demand offsets a strong recovery in air travel after the pandemic. Officials warned that significant uncertainties and downside risks in the global economy remain, including the war in Ukraine and central bank moves to fight decades-high inflation with multiple interest hikes. China is the only major economy still attempting to stamp out the domestic spread of the virus, and a fresh outbreak has seen authorities impose strict containment measures such as shutting down parts of cities and placing contacts of infected patients into strict quarantine. The city-state's economic performance is often seen as a useful barometer of the global environment because of its reliance on trade with the rest of the world. The Philippine Embassy in Japan organized the ASEAN Family Day on November 12 at the Kasai Rinkai Park in Edogawa, Tokyo. After a 2-year hiatus, over 200 personnel and family members from all 10 embassies of ASEAN in Tokyo participated in the event, which featured games and cuisine from the ASEAN region. Philippine Embassy Chargé d'Affaires Robespierre Bolivar, who hosted the event, said in his remarks that the ASEAN Family Day is the most anticipated ASEAN event in Tokyo. A year our families gather in the spirit of fun and friendship, he said, providing a platform to further strengthen the bonds of camaraderie within the ASEAN region. During the day, participants displayed skill and competitiveness in well-loved games such as tug of war, water relay, and kids relay. The Philippine Embassy promoted traditional Philippine games such as sipa, luksong lubid, Holen Tiakad Tumbalata, and Jack and Poy as pit stop challenges in its own version of the famous game Amazing Race. And a French-Cambodian director's film about a Korean-French adopter's quest to find her birth parents heralds the arrival of significant joint productions in cinema that feature fluid identities both on and off the screen. First, let's listen in.
저는 불어도 전혀 안 배우고 그 어린 나이에 가가지고 그냥 정말 부딪히면서 배웠거든요. 그래서 그리고 거기는 그 인종차별 그런 것도 되게 많고 아직도 인종차별이 되게 많아요. 거기는 되게 심한 문제인데 그래서 그런 거 그리고 또 특히 여성으로서 그 아시안 여성으로서 그 백인 그 환경에서 살아남다는 게 정말 힘들거든요. 그래가지고 항상 싸워왔던 것 같아요. 그래서 그런.
So I think what I find fascinating in the impossibility or the difficulty of people to label what the film origin or nationality is totally echoes the struggle of Freddie herself, of having people always trying to put her in a box, either she's considered as French or Korean or adoptee or the daughter stuck, and you start to have some kind of question of legitimacy of why do I make that story because I'm not Korean, I'm not a woman, I'm not adoptee, so what is my take on that? And then at one point in the darkness you find the light back to feel that, oh okay, actually it's also something I feel very connected to. And I also have two cultures, and the culture of my parents, which is, let's say, my origin culture, I didn't know anything about it until I decided to go to Cambodia at the age of 25, and now I'm living there. I just got a baby there, and so the future is there as well for me. So that this first kind of carefree trip in Cambodia when I was 25, exactly like Freddie, totally changed my life. But at the time that I was going the first trip, I would never think that it will change my life. I was just thinking like Freddie that that's just holidays. I'm just going to see that country. Don't see a big name of journey to the roots into it. And how it was a big phenomenon.
Born in France to Cambodian immigrants, Chu discovered in his teens that his grandfather had been one of the Southeast Asian country's leading film producers in the 1960s. And like Freddie in the film, Chu made a life-changing trip to his family's native country at the age of 25. And he now lives in Cambodia and says his work is influenced by his own experiences of the question of double culture and double identity and how you deal with that. The plot in Return to Seoul was inspired by Chu's experience accompanying a friend, a Korean-born adoptee, on her journey to reuniting with her birth parents. The multicultural tale, directed by David Chu, was recently shown at Busan International Film Festival as one of several jointly produced films in which non-Korean directors collaborated with the Korean crew, with filming also taking place in South Korea.
소주 2병이랑 닭발 한 접시 주세요.
친구분이 굉장히 특이하시네요.
As my usual habit, I'd like to end the day on a positive note. Let's encourage and build each other up so that no one is left behind. And that's it for tonight's broadcast of ASEAN in Focus. I'm Alma Angeles. We'll see you back tomorrow. And reminding you to stay in the news because we live in extraordinary times. Good night.